the weekly show with David J. Maloney. This week, David chats with Jesus Revolution director Brent McCorkle. And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome, everyone, to the weekly show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. This week, we have Brent McCorkle back with us again. He's a director whose work includes films like Unconditional and I Can Only Imagine. And his latest film, Jesus Revolution, with Kelsey Grammer and Jonathan Roumie, is one of the most anticipated films of the season. So we've got, again, none other than Brent McCorkle back with us again tonight. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Did you guys have any hesitation in casting Jonathan Roumie as Lonnie Frisbee, considering Jonathan's already associated with Jesus due to his concurrent portrayal of Christ in The Chosen?
No, I think quite the opposite. For me, at least, I thought, "Whoa, this is going to be crazy," because it's such a radical departure. It's going to be like a different voice, a different posture. Maybe the length of the hair I can see. But what's really funny is, people thought that we were writing like a Chosen joke when he gets up. He gets up at one point and he says, "People say I'm trying to look like Jesus.
Yes,
I can't think of anybody else I'd rather look like." People thought we wrote that maybe as like an inside baseball Chosen joke. No, Lonnie actually said that in an interview. So It's interesting. He's a kid. He's a street preacher trying to emulate Jesus as much as he can. And he would wear robes and deerskin capes, and he would do all that stuff. And so, I don't know, man. I think he did it. I will say, though, for the rabid Chosen fans out there, it probably takes them a couple scenes.
Yeah.
They're like, throw down the movie. It's like, why is Jesus talking like he's from the Northeast?
Yeah.
So I think to your point, maybe I made peace with it, faster than I should have. But I don't know. To me, I knew he was going to come in with something completely different. He's like one of the most fantastic actors I've ever had a chance to work with. So I was never worried that he couldn't do it or wouldn't give us enough dimensionality away from the Jesus character. But at the same time, like, for the people that know him and see him in that role and like just binge The Chosen over and over, because it's such a great feeling film, and his portrayal of Jesus is so warm and kind and friendly and loving, and I don't know, it's so beautiful what he does. So I can understand a bunch of people being tripped up by him, going a different way, and at times acting badly, as a human. So I'm sure that would be an interesting thing to unpack with some rabid Chosen fans. But from my standpoint, from my vantage point, just as a filmmaker, I think it's just a wonderful departure. And you look at him, you're like, whoa, this dude's got range, So yeah.
How did Kelsey Grammer first become involved with the film?
Yeah, man, that's another great story. Kelsey was John Irwin's #1 pick, and I was all about it too. And it turns out Kelsey was really on this deep spiritual quest. He was on a retreat with some of his friends from the film community, and on this retreat, they were lamenting the fact that a lot of the stuff that they had done in their film careers was just for money. They wished that more of their body of work had contained something of spiritual or social or cultural significance. And they made a bit of like a blood oath there that night. They said, from going forward, as much as we can, sometimes you got to just take a job and pay the bills. We get it. But it's going forward as much as we can. Let's do something of spiritual significance. So they go home. Kelsey goes to sleep, wakes up the next morning, and the Jesus Revolution script was in his inbox. And he opened it up that morning, read it all the way through without stopping, clicked out of it, called his agent and said, "I don't care about the money. Find out what the schedule is. I'm in. I'm doing this." And so he really took that as a sign. And in his mind, it was almost like they put up a prayer that weekend, like, God, will you please send us stuff that would allow us to be more spiritually significant in the work that we take on. So for him, it was a bit of an answer to a prayer, and to inherit him in the time of his life where he's at right now, which is this deep, deep spiritual peace and presence that he's carrying. I mean, dude, I was so drawn to him. Like, he's had a lot worse stuff happen to him in his life than me. He has walked a very deep valley, man, and he has more peace than me on a daily basis. And I found myself like seeking him out in between takes and like, hey man, tell me about your faith and tell me about the stuff that happened to you and like how you were able to forgive this and let it go. And man, dude, I would go to church with him, man, just in tears. He's a powerful human being, man. And just where he's at right now, he gave that to the world. He just opened up his heart and said, where I'm at right now, I'm fully vulnerable. I'm fully here. I'm fully authentic. I'm going to put everything that I'm feeling and going through in my life into this role. And it's the greatest thing he's ever done.
I thought I heard that his wife had said that she thought this was his best work.
Yeah, someone sent me, that's very true. And someone sent me an NPR film podcast today, and they said it. They're like, this is the greatest thing he's ever done. And I think it's undeniably so.
It's got to be kind of surreal, too, also to see Kelsey Grammer openly tearing up in interviews as he discusses his role in working on this film.
Yeah, it's because of where he's at spiritually. Yeah. And I mean, I wish crowds of people could get around him and sit and listen to him, because your heart would explode with love and peace. You would feel the spirit. I mean, he's just he's being led gently by the hand through some beautiful spiritual pastures right now, and he's sharing with everybody. And man, it's sometimes, man, directors, they get really arrogant and they take all the credit for everything, even the stuff they didn't do. And I just find that it's a fool's errand, because number one, it takes hundreds of people to make a movie. It's like that director arrogantly taking all the credit for their movie. That's like them being on a pirate ship with no crew and thinking they can sail somewhere, anywhere. You can't. If it's a 400-man ship, I'm sorry, you're not going anywhere. And so I think for me, especially with Kelsey, just feeling like I was getting to ride along in this beautiful experience and not take credit for any of it. Everything aligned, and it just felt really guided. And I'm so grateful that he said yes to this movie would not be the same without all of these cast saying yes. And, very much so the case with Kelsey.
Both Jonathan and Kelsey portray real life people. How much research did you that you do yourself on the Jesus movement to understand these real life characters before you had to arrive on the set the first day?
Oh, I did a ton of research. Like I said, I read a handful of books. I watched some documentaries. There's a really interesting documentary called Lonnie Frisbee, The Life of a Hippie Street Preacher, I think. And it's like a really bare bones documentary, but I found it very compelling. And I think they actually interviewed Chuck's son for it. So I really liked that documentary. I read a book called God's Forever Family, and it was very academic, and it had a lot of research and like polls and things of like, what were you reading at the time? Or like, what were your favorite musicians? What were your favorite bands? What were your favorite movies? And I was, they were interviewing the Jesus people of the time. And so I found that to be a very informative book. And then the rest of it was watching old archives I would find of like Chuck preaching or Lonnie preaching, or when they would get on TV shows, or when they got on Catherine Coleman. And we definitely wanted to do a shout out to the real Catherine Coleman, for having them on her show, which she did. And so we recreated a lot of that in a cinematic way. But yeah, it was a lot of research, man. A lot of research, not just into the Jesus movement, but into the time period. There was a crazy level of detail that went into crafting this film to make it feel like you were actually in 1969. So yeah, man, a lot of love from a ton of great minds, I think, that went into this and gave it all the polish and the detail and the authenticity that we needed.
And obviously, one of the most fascinating, characters who is a real life person in the movie is that of Lonnie Frisbee, who you've mentioned. And I've read accounts of people who knew him, and some of them literally said that being with him was like being with one of the apostles. Did you hear any stories like that as well?
Oh yeah, all the time. I've heard crazy stories about him. Obviously, legends build up around bigger than life personalities, but I mean, I heard one story, and again, I don't know if it's true, but there was a guy, he was down and out, he's about to lose everything. And he went underneath this oak tree and asked God a question. And he was like, God, I just need to know yes or no. I need to know yes or no tomorrow, or like my life's going to explode. And he saw Lonnie, I think that next day. And Lonnie just looks at him. He goes, yeah, you were asking God something underneath an oak tree yesterday. And God says, yes. The guy just like fell on the ground and like lost his mind. So he definitely was a seer for sure. I definitely think he had a definitely strong spiritual gifts. And I think he was a very complex, complicated human being. But me and John and Jonathan, especially, we were grieved by the fact that he was actually written out of church history just because of some of his moral failings and some of the struggles that he had, or what some would perceive to be moral failings, or what others would not. And so the big thing we wanted to do was bring him into the story and try to do a character justice, based on him being involved, and really reinstantiate him into the central narrative, which people have tried to kind of wipe him out of over the decades.
Well, did you also have access to Greg Laurie? Because Greg's still alive, right? So, and he's got to have stories, yeah.
Oh yeah. We patterned the overwhelming majority of the movie off Greg's anecdotes and stories, and his interactions and what he saw of Chuck and Lonnie, because we had close access to Greg, and John and Irwin and Greg Laurie are dear friends, and so I remember sitting with them for, I don't know, 2 10-hour days, I think, and just getting the whole data drop of everything that happened, and so much of their interviews and what Greg ultimately wrote into the book that he did with Ellen Vaughn made it into the film. So definitely Greg's accounts of things and his book and those interviews are the spine of our story for sure.
It's my understanding you guys fought hard to gain access to the real Pirates Cove, basically to recreate the baptisms that happened there for this film. What was that process like, and what was the atmosphere like shooting there?
Well, John says for him, it's the most electric spiritual day of his career. It was really important for us, I think, to go back to that space where it really happened. There was a lot of talk of shooting at different places, and I had been to Pirates Cove multiple times. John's been there more than me, and he and I were pretty adamant that it needed to go back there, and it was expensive. It was very expensive, and
is that because it was tough to shoot? Because you'd have to, because to do the scenes in the water, you'd have to be concerned about electrical. I think I saw some behind the scenes stuff where you guys had to put stuff on like floats or air mattresses or stuff in order to.
Yeah, the bigger issue was. We had a techno crane that we wanted to bring in. Those things weighed like the weight of like 10 cars, so it's crazy. And then all the gear for the beach had to be hand carried up over rocks. All the extras had to walk up and over these rocks. We had to hire an entire stunt team just to stand around and make sure that nobody fell or tripped. So you have like almost like a fire brigade of guys like saying, hey, walk this way, walk that way, step up this rock. And, guys carrying hundreds of pounds of gear of stuff. In addition to that, the state of California will not let you close any of their beaches. So, to do a film, you really want to be able to close things down. So if you listen really closely, I think we scrubbed most of it out, but there were children yelling. Right outside of the shots, there's like kids jumping around in their floaties, in the water, and parents just trying to I felt a little bit bad because they're trying to have their nice calm time. Film sets are very disruptive and we're very loud and take over everything. And so yeah, we did not, it's incredible to see what we did, because we did not have that beach. Like when you talk about having a location, or we did not have that location. We couldn't, if somebody really wanted to be adamant and stand out in the middle of that, with their floaties, they could have.
So my understanding is that filming the scene at Pirates Cove was so ultimately powerful for so many people that there were actually a handful of people who were baptized on film for the sake of being baptized on film, but they actually had a spiritual experience.
That's absolutely true. I've got a funny story about that. Jonathan is a hardcore Catholic, and none of these actors are are pastors or any kind of leadership in the church. And so Greg, it was so funny. Laurie, last minute took them to evangelical baptism boot camp, like took them out in the water. He's like, well, here's what you want to do. Just get them to bend their knees. And, he like walked them through the whole thing that some of them might want to hold their nose. So hold them this way. Make sure you don't throw your back out when you pick, it's like all this, he schooled these guys into how to actually baptize someone in the evangelical tradition, which was amazing. They nailed it. If you watch how they're baptizing people like Joel Courtney and Jonathan Roumie, they'd never done anything like that before. So when you see them, it's like an actor, and to a smaller degree, but it's like an actor who doesn't ride a horse and then they go to a horse riding school and they just look like a rock star, and they look like a cowboy when they ride because they put the time in. So the baptism looked really good, and they did like learn it from Greg and do really well. But in the midst of all that, we're running takes and sending people out in the water to be baptized. And we yelled cut, and Jonathan came in, his eyes kind of wide. He's like, I don't know if this counts or not, but 5 people in a row just said they really wanted to be baptized. And so I said these words, I said the words that I thought I needed to say, and I baptized them. And Greg's like, yeah, man, it's fine. Theologically, you're good. Like, you baptize those people. And so anyway, I mean, Jonathan Roumie was holding evangelical baptisms. And so anyway, it was a pretty amazing story. But it was definitely, there was something in the air. There was something electric in the air on those days for sure.
There are so many other scenes that stand out in my mind as well from the movie. Was there a scene that turned out to be your favorite in the film? Was it the baptism scene, or was it something else?
I think for John it was. For me, it always was. Even when I discovered this scene in the research, I was crying. I couldn't believe it. I was so overwhelmed. And I remember on this day at the office, I went to John and I said, here's the scene. If we get this right, we could murder all the other scenes and botch everything. But if this scene is right, it's a movie that will work.
Wheelchair scene?
No, it's the scene. It's the scene where Chuck fights to let the hippies in, and he washes the feet of the hippies.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's a tearful moment.
Yeah, it's just overwhelmingly powerful because he defeats the tradition of the church with the actions of Jesus. And it's overwhelming, man. It overwhelms me. I've seen it hundreds of times. I tears will fall down my face every time I watch it. It's what the world needs. And it's the element of Jesus that I want the young kids to see, that they oftentimes don't see with the loudest voices in the church right now.
So, this film, like I mentioned earlier, is kind of releasing at a rather interesting time in history, and you kind of touched upon it a little bit. And now we've got countless revivals taking place on college campuses across the country. What do you think the movie right now, being released especially right now, has to say to our current cultural movement?
Yeah, I think all of us are feeling a call and a draw back to love. The love of God. And I think I've really been encouraged. I actually read an article. A Nashville woman went to Ashbury and they interviewed her, and she was quick to say that these kids were purposefully disavowing any politics. And they're saying this is about a move of the Holy Spirit. And I think that's the next flex for the faith community. Like, politics is not the answer, guys. The answer is love, And so I really do feel like in Asbury and these other places, I think there's this stripping away of edifice and baggage and facade. And I think it's really like a stripping down of the cultural ramifications of like where the church has gone recently. And when I say that, I don't really mean the church, because I think that can be offensive sometimes. Like, you can have different definitions of the church. The church is the body of Christ, but there's also like an industrialized complex or like a cultural Christianity, and that moves in different ways. So you had Christians back in the day that had slaves, and then you had Christians back in the day that were abolitionists. So they were two completely different cultures. And I always try to grapple with people on that. It's like, don't automatically assume the culture of your day is what Jesus wants, because it may not be. So if this is a return back to the love of Christ and the love of God, I think it's going to mean amazing things for our world, for our planet, for our country. If it's like a rejection of this kind of like over politicized version of Christianity, I think it's really going to help us, honestly. So yes, man, if this is in tandem with that kind of move, I think we're getting ready to head into some beautiful, beautiful territory, man. Like, and I will finish by saying this. The word sanctuary has been such a beautiful word in the lexicon of Christianity. But if you ask kids today who are unchurched and, where would you go if the bottom drops out of your life? Make a list of the 10 places you would go to feel safe. A lot of them would not have the church in the top 10 list. And I want that to change, man. Let's get back to sanctuary. Like, can we have a safe space? Like, it's so beautiful when Chuck's preaching and he just says, you are all welcome here. We just like pan across those beautiful faces, and they're the ones who are excited to be in church. And, they're the ones bringing in all the peace and the love. And so it's more nuanced in our film, but the people that Chuck chose to let in, they changed him as much, as his decision to let them in changed the situation. And so I don't know, man. I just think we need a more generous faith and a more loving faith in our world. And when that is happening, and I'm not saying that's not happening, it's happening everywhere. But if there could be more of that, and a cultural shift towards that, I think we could really see some beautiful times ahead.
Now, Brent, before we wrap up, I'd like to give kind of just a quick plug for our local viewership. You guys shot much of the film here in Alabama and in Baldwin County within literally the TV viewing area of my show. And of course, elsewhere. What brought you guys down to Southern Alabama?
That's so cool to hear. I love telling everybody that we shot 85% of our movie in the Mobile, Alabama area. And people's minds are blown. They're like, man, that was beautiful. That's incredible. Man, you guys have the most beautiful beaches. I mean, they're mind blowing. I grew up in Texas, and the Gulf is up, man, dude, Texas beaches do not hold a candle like to you guys. So beautiful areas, so the tax incentive system in your state is very robust. It's very strong. And also the beaches are beautiful. You guys have palm trees, and we found some amazing architecture that totally feels like Southern California. So, for instance, I think people would automatically assume that we picked up the high school in LA. We shot our last week in LA. That high school is in Mobile, and it's beautiful. And it looks, my brother's a high school teacher. It looks just like the campus that he works on in Southern California.
Wrapping up, do you have any idea what your next film is going to be yet? What's the next story you want to tell?
I personally don't know what mine is. I'm very excited and hopeful for the future. There's a lot of things swirling around that are very promising and cool, but I will say I'm probably most excited about Andy's movie next, which is the Navy SEAL movie. It's called Fearless, and I think that's going to be a really great film. And there's a lot of energy around it, and so yeah, I'm excited to champion Andy and get behind him and be his cheerleader, just like he was for me on this film. And so I'd say, as far as Kingdom Story Company goes, it's going to be Fearless for sure. I don't know, man. I think we got some bright days ahead for the space, and I'm very excited to be a part of it.
Brent, thank you so much for joining us.
Man, thank you for these questions. I really enjoyed it. I love the in-depth questions. They were really thought out. And yeah, man, this movie, I'm so proud of it and so proud of the team. So thank you for spending some time with me talking about it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brent McCorkle. That's our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. A special thanks to director Brent McCorkle for joining us again. Stay safe, everyone.